Some nations are ruled by their weather, others by their history. The Scottish Highlands refuses to be governed by either. It simply outlasts both. Mountains older than the Atlantic rise from bogland that swallows roads whole. Villages of 200 people sit further from a hospital than most Europeans are from another country. Ruins outnumber occupied houses, in some glens 10 to 1. Winter strips daylight to 6 thin hours before dark reclaims the glens. By any reasonable measure, this should be marginal land. And yet people plan weddings around the midge season, argue fondly over whose village has the better loch view, and queue happily for a single weekly delivery van. The question isn't whether people can survive in the Highlands. It's what they've learned up here that the rest of us left behind. The Highlands occupy northern Scotland, roughly 10,000 square miles carved by ice, home to fewer than 250,000 people. Its defining feature is contradiction. Ancient rock beneath the year's most changeable weather. A place shaped by endurance, not convenience. The Highlands cover an area comparable to Belgium, yet hold barely a 40th of its population. Drive for an hour in some counties and you may pass a single farmhouse, a phone box no longer connected to anything, and more sheep than the nearest 3 villages combined. There are stretches of the A836 in Sutherland where the next fuel station is genuinely further away than the last one you passed. No chain stores, no traffic lights, no mobile signal for miles at a stretch. Absence here is not a failure of infrastructure. It is the point. Before we go further, where in the world are you watching this from? Drop it in the comments. We're curious how far this story is traveling. Inverness, the unofficial capital of the region, takes its name from the Gaelic Imbir Nis, mouth of the River Ness, a founding logic as plain as the land itself: build where the river meets the sea, and let the town grow from there. It has done so for over 1,000 years, yet it remains modest by any national standard, a town that still feels like a large village pretending otherwise. Politically, the Highlands carry oddities most of the UK has forgotten it has. Crofting, a system of small-scale, regulated land tenure unique to Scotland, still governs how many residents can legally use their own land, a holdover from 19th century land reform that no other part of Britain retains in quite the same form. Some estates here are larger than European principalities, owned by families or trusts whose claims stretch back centuries, a private land economy that shapes who can live where more than any zoning law does. And then there is the land itself, which asks for nothing except to be looked at properly. Glencoe does not announce itself gently. Its walls rise sheer and dark on either side of the road, waterfalls unspooling down rock faces slicked with a permanent damp, clouds snagging on peaks that seem to generate their own weather, independent of anything happening a mile away. Stand at the right bend in the road at the right hour of a grey October afternoon, and the glen looks less like scenery than like something still actively being built. Take a town like Ullapool, on the shore of Loch. a place you can walk end to end in under 15 minutes, and yet one that holds a working harbour, a bookshop, 3 pubs, and a ferry terminal to the Outer Hebrides. Nothing here is built to impress from a distance. Houses are low, whitewashed or harled in practical pale colours, chosen to shed the near-constant rain rather than flatter the eye, arranged in tight rows facing the water, because in a place this exposed, shelter from wind matters more than a view. What Ullapool and towns like it lack says as much as what they contain. No traffic lights, no supermarket chain larger than a co-op, no queue longer than the time it takes to hear the full weather forecast from whoever's ahead of you. Crime here is rare enough that a theft makes the front page of the local paper for weeks. There is no anonymity, not just in the sense that people know each other, but in the deeper sense that everyone's business, weather watching, and worries are shared property. The people who end up staying are, almost without exception, self-selecting. Nobody drifts into the Highlands by accident and remains for decades. The winters are too long and the isolation too real for anyone who hasn't actively chosen it. Those who do stay tend to describe the same thing. Not adventure exactly, but relief. Relief from a pace of life that asked more of them than they wanted to give. A retired teacher in Ullapool, or a young family running a bed and breakfast that's been in the same building for 3 generations, the thread connecting them is not ambition. It's the deliberate decision to want less noise. The village hall does more work than any single building has any right to. In Ullapool and towns of its size, the same modest hall hosts a sealid on Saturday, a blood donor session on Monday, and a primary school nativity play in December. Not because the community lacks alternatives, but because concentrating life into one shared roof is simply more efficient and more honest about what matters. Local schools often teach a handful of year groups in a single classroom, taught by 1 or 2 teachers who know every child's family by name and often by 3 generations of history. Newcomers describe an initial period of quiet scrutiny, not hostility, but a careful, unhurried process of being sized up before being let in, followed, if they stay long enough, by an inclusion so complete it can feel disorienting to anyone used to city anonymity. There are more red deer in the Scottish Highlands than there are people. By some estimates, well over 300,000 of them roam the Glens, outnumbering the human population several times over. Deer management here is not a hobby. It is a legal, seasonal necessity, with culls coordinated across estate boundaries to keep numbers from stripping the native woodland bare. Locals plan road journeys at dusk around deer crossings the way city drivers plan around rush hour. Above the deer, golden eagles hold territories that can stretch for dozens of square miles, among the largest home ranges of any eagle species on Earth. A single breeding pair may need an entire glen system simply to feed itself. Sea eagles, reintroduced after being hunted to extinction in Britain a century ago, now nest again along the western coast, a slow, deliberate act of ecological repair that residents speak of with quiet, genuine pride. Then there is the creature that shapes daily behavior more than any predator, the midge. Highlanders plan barbecues, weddings, and even hill-walking routes around wind direction and midge forecasts, with the same seriousness mainland Europeans reserve for storm warnings. It is, without irony, one of the most organizing forces in Highland summer life. Offshore, the coastline hosts one of the most improbable superlatives in British wildlife. Minke whales and even occasional orcapods pass through the Minch, the strait between the mainland and the Outer Hebrides, while basking sharks, the second largest fish on Earth, filter feed along the surface in early summer, drawn by plankton blooms that turn the water briefly, faintly green. Rutting season, each autumn, turns the glens briefly theatrical. Stags roar across the hillsides in a guttural carrying bellow that can be heard from more than a mile away, locking antlers in contests over hinds that occasionally end in real injury and, rarely, death. Wildlife guides time-entire tours around it, and locals, who have heard the sound every year of their lives, still stop what they're doing to listen. Farmers and crofters hold a working, sometimes uneasy relationship with this abundance. A sea eagle overhead is celebrated by tourists and regarded far more warily by anyone who has just lost a lamb to one. The wild here is not a backdrop. It is a neighbour, with all the complications that word implies. Nothing disorients a newcomer to the Highlands quite like the light. In December, the sun in the far north may rise after 9 in the morning and set before 4 in the afternoon, casting barely 6 hours of pale, low daylight before the dark reclaims the glens. For those unused to it, the effect is a kind of quiet dread, a sense of the day ending before it has properly begun, of entire weeks lived mostly by lamplight. Residents adapt in ways both practical and psychological. Homes are built with deep-set windows and heavy insulation, not for style, but survival. Wood stores are stacked by early autumn with the seriousness of a military supply chain. Whiskey, tea, and long, unhurried conversation become the evening's default entertainment because there is, quite simply, little else to do once darkness falls at 3:30. Many describe a kind of internal recalibration. Winter becomes a season for stillness rather than achievement, and Highlanders speak of learning to stop measuring their days by what daylight allows. But the same tilt of the earth that steals winter's light gives an almost absurd gift each summer. In June, the far north experiences what locals call the simmer dim, a twilight so prolonged that true darkness never quite arrives, the sky holding a soft, silvery half-light from midnight until the sun returns a few hours later. Farmers work fields at 11 at night under a sky the colour of old pewter. Children play outdoors long past any clock's suggestion of bedtime. Ask residents what they choose to keep, given the option to erase one season, and most hesitate. The dark, they say, is what makes the simmerdim feel earned. Between the two extremes sits a shorter, subtler season locals value out of proportion to its length. The low, golden light of early autumn, when bracken turns copper across whole hillsides and the air carries the particular sharpness that means the long dark is coming, but has not arrived yet. The disorientation cuts both ways, and visitors underestimate how disruptive the light itself can be, not just its absence. In midsummer, hotel curtains in the far north are cut deliberately heavy, a practical response to guests who cannot otherwise sleep with a sky that refuses to darken past dusk. Farmers describe a genuine difficulty switching off in June, an almost physical inability to stop working when the light offers no natural cue that the day has ended. And yet ask a Highlander to choose between a place with gentler, more even seasons and their own extreme ones, and most decline the trade outright. The intensity, they say, is what makes the ordinary months feel so distinctly earned. Few regions this size carry global weight the way the Highlands do through a single industry, whiskey. Distilleries like Glenmorangie, Talisker, and dozens of smaller producers scattered across the Glens export a product tied inseparably to this specific water, this specific peat, this specific air. A claim of origin so central to the industry that Scotch cannot legally be produced anywhere else on Earth. The region's economy, tourism, and international reputation are bound to a drink made in copper stills that in some distilleries haven't changed shape in over a century. The Highlands also carry a harder, more contested history. The Highland clearances of the 18th and 19th centuries saw tens of thousands of tenant farmers evicted from land their families had worked for generations. To make way for more profitable sheep farming, a historical wound still openly discussed, still shaping land ownership debates today. What does a landscape owe the people forced out of it? What does it owe the ones who stayed? The region also played an outsized military role far beyond its population during the Second World War. Highland commando training centres at places like Achnacarry prepared elite forces for operations across Europe, chosen specifically because the terrain was brutal enough to make anywhere else feel manageable by comparison. A wound, a whiskey, a war that borrowed the land's cruelty and called it preparation. Beyond whiskey, the region's global reach runs through music as much as history. The Highlands gave the world the modern image of the bagpipe and the pibroch, the classical, slow-building form of pipe music once reserved for clan gatherings, laments, and calls to battle, still taught today at institutions like the National Piping Centre and performed at international competitions that draw pipers from Canada, New Zealand, and beyond. Between a sport, a sound, and a set of numbers gathered in the rain year after year, the Highlands export more of themselves to the world than their modest population would ever suggest. If one structure carries the Highlands' identity on its shoulders, it is Eilean Donan Castle, perched on a small tidal island where 3 sea lochs meet near Dorney. Its stated purpose was always defensive, a stronghold guarding the approach from the sea against Viking and later clan rivals, but its real power lies in its position. A castle that seems to grow directly out of the rock it stands on, connected to the mainland only by a narrow stone footbridge that the tide in earlier centuries would occasionally reclaim. The castle was almost entirely destroyed in 1719, shelled by English ships during a Jacobite uprising, and lay in ruins for nearly 200 years before a 20th century restoration rebuilt it stone by stone from old plans and memory. That its ruin lasted longer than either its original life or its restored one is a detail most visitors never learn, and one that changes how the building reads once you know it. Locals regard it with a mixture of quiet pride and mild bemusement. It is, after all, one of the most photographed buildings in Scotland, appearing in countless films as shorthand for ancient Scotland to audiences who have never set foot within 100 miles of it. For residents, It is less a symbol performed for outsiders than a fixed point on the horizon, glimpsed from car windows on ordinary Tuesday errands, so familiar it barely registers, until a visitor's reaction reminds them what they're looking at. The castle's current life is stranger than its old one. Since reopening to the public in 1955, it has appeared as a stand-in for ancient Scotland in films and adverts made by people who never asked permission from the Glen itself. Its silhouette borrowed so often that many who recognize it have never actually stood in front of it. Pride and mild irritation in Dorney are not mutually exclusive. Beyond the postcard villages sits a quieter, stranger layer of Highland life. In pockets of the northwest, Gaelic is still the first language spoken at home. Not a revival project, but an unbroken thread, taught in local primary schools alongside English, spoken in kitchens and at kirk services in a tongue older than the castles built to guard this coast. Fewer than 60,000 people in all of Scotland now speak it fluently, and a disproportionate share of them live in these scattered northern communities, holding on to something the rest of the country largely let go of generations ago. Elsewhere, abandoned settlements, the physical remnants of the clearances, sit half swallowed by bracken and heather, the outlines of old croft houses still visible as low stone walls in fields that haven't been worked in over a century. Locals know exactly where these are. Visitors, following marked trails, usually walk straight past them. And in a handful of the more remote sea lochs, small, deliberately chosen intentional communities, some religious, some simply seeking distance from modern life, have settled in old farmhouses and estate cottages, an odd modern echo of the very isolation the clearances once forced on others, except this time entirely by choice. Whether that irony sits comfortably is not a question anyone here tries to resolve neatly. Further layers surface once you know where to look. Along parts of the western seaboard, small pockets of Polish, Latvian and Italian residents, many arriving originally for seasonal fish farm or hospitality work, have settled permanently, running village shops or marrying into crofting families, a quiet cosmopolitanism that sits oddly against the region's monocultural reputation. None of this fits neatly into the postcard version of the region, and locals tend not to volunteer it unprompted, not out of secrecy, but because it simply isn't what visitors usually ask about. Beneath the heather and the bracken lies some of the oldest exposed rock on the planet. The Louisian gneiss found in the northwest Highlands formed roughly 3 billion years ago, predating almost all complex life on Earth, older than bones, older than shells, older than the very idea of a backbone. Walking across an outcrop of it near Lochs is, geologically speaking, closer to touching the early history of the planet than almost anywhere else accessible on foot. Layered above and around this ancient basement rock are the visible fingerprints of the last ice age. U-shaped glens gouged out by glaciers that retreated roughly 11,000 years ago, leaving behind steep-sided valleys, scattered boulders called erratics dropped hundreds of miles from where they formed, and lochs carved deep enough to hold entire weather systems of their own. This landscape is not a record of recent change, it is a record of deep, ordinary geological time, shaped by forces that have been rearranging this rock for longer than human memory can hold. For residents, the relationship to this landscape is less scientific than sensory. A hill walker who has climbed the same Munro 40 times over 40 years describes the mountain not as a fixed object, but as something that changes mood with the weather. Sometimes brutal, sometimes gentle, always older than any complaint a person could bring to it. Children here grow up measuring their own smallness against glens that took ice ages to carve. An early, almost automatic lesson in scale that never quite leaves them. The rock itself carries scars from more than ice. Fault lines running through the Great Glen, the long, straight geological trench that holds Loch Ness, mark one of the largest strike-slip faults in Britain, a crack in the Earth's crust along which entire landmasses once slid past each other over hundreds of millions of years, long before the mountains around it took their current shape. Geologists still travel from around the world specifically to study exposures here, since few places on Earth display such a long, continuous record of continental collision and erosion in rock, this accessible on foot. Local quarrying and building stone, pink Torridonian sandstone, grey Highland granite carries this deep history directly into everyday structures, meaning a garden wall or a church built 2 centuries ago may be constructed from stone that is, itself, older than complex life. Even the region's famous lochs owe their improbable depth to this same ancient violence. Loch Morar, Britain's deepest freshwater loch, plunges further below sea level than most of the mountains around it rise above it, a scale locals absorb early and rarely stop finding strange. Lose light for months at a time. You drive an hour for milk you forgot to stock. You learn to read a midge forecast with the same seriousness as a storm warning, and you accept that a ferry cancellation might mean rearranging an entire week of your life. And yet, the people who come here rarely speak of hardship. They speak of quiet. Something slows down in a person who stays in the Highlands long enough. The urgency that feels so natural elsewhere, the sense that every hour must be spent on something, loosens its grip. People here learn to measure time by weather and season rather than by deadline, and most describe the change not as loss, but as a kind of recovered attention, to a hillside in changing light, to a conversation with no clock attached to it, to the particular silence of a glen with no other cars on the road. And somewhere along a sea loch near Dorney, a castle still stands on its narrow tidal island, rebuilt once from ruin, watched over by people who barely notice it anymore and cannot quite imagine the skyline without it. A small, stubborn proof that some things, once nearly lost, can still be carried forward. The Highlands do not need to convince anyone to stay. Those who belong already know it. The mist will keep rolling down the same glens it always has. The light will keep leaving in December and returning barely changed in June, and the land, indifferent and patient, will go on keeping the people who chose it, long after they've stopped noticing it's doing so,